Hi, Joe. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So we've met each other a while ago in a safe training that you held for us in advanced safe,
hmm
um, and you have actually quite a career behind. So you've been working in engineering. You've been VP of engineering. Then you moved to agile coaching. Then you've been a framework methodologist for safe scaled agile framework, and now you're CIO and chief AI officer in another company that you founded around training and consulting around organization and agility.
Yeah,
And also, you're a candidate for a PhD in computer science and AI.
correct.
So tell us a bit about how did you end up here, and how did you end up in engineering, and maybe in consulting and safe consulting. And I think we have a lot of people in our audience that might be interested particularly about safe. And then maybe you can we can talk a bit about AI as well.
Yeah, so I didn't come here the direct route. When I went to the university for my undergraduate, it wasn't as an engineering major. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I have a very large Italian family, and there are no engineers in our family. It's usually lawyers who might have a doctor in the family or something like that. So medical or law or something like that. And I was the weird one that decided in my sophomore year that I wanted to do something different. And so um, engineers engineering majors got a lot of respect on campus because it's just such a difficult program. And I wanted to be challenged, and so that attracted me. And we're talking about the time around the advent of the personal computer, where PCs started showing up in homes and things like that. And yes, I'm that old, and so it became intriguing to me to start to want to develop, program these computers. I started working for Defense Department on embedded systems. So it was a combination of, so it was firmware systems, basically, cyber physical, combination of hardware, software, missile defense, a whole bunch of different kinds of things. And then I went again in a different direction. I started looking at more field application engineering. It worked for an embedded systems company for a long time. Started getting intrigued by more of the leadership track. Was working for Nokia at the time in Dallas, and went back to school to SMU, got my MBA. Just started, and from that point became vice president. Left Nokia and became vice president of engineering of smaller company, um, working on big data. And From there, really the agile portion, I started learning a lot more. This kind of crisscrosses for how I became also integrated in with Safe. While I was working at Nokia, um, I had learned about Agile when I was working for a company called Borland. Borland was a software tools company back when people still use those kind of software tools like Turbo Pascal. If you can remember Borland, you're officially old
Yeah.
like me, because that's basically where it came from. But I learned about Agile from there, but I really started applying it at Nokia when Nokia made their entire R&D, 35,000 people at the time, transitioned, transformed, however you want to call it, into a lean, agile kind of thing. And at that point in time, Nokia was printing money to the tune of about, I don't know, 1.3 million euros a quarter, or some ridiculous number. 100 million a year, a quarter, I think, is what the numbers were. And so we hired the best of the best agile coaches. We hired Dean Leffingwell, which is where I met him before we went to Scaled Agile. Ken Schwaber was there. Mike Cohn was there. Kenny Rubin was there, but pretty much the who's who of Agile at that point in time. And so I got a really good mentorship from a lot of different people. Um, Left there, brought Agile in to the company that I became the VP of engineering for, the big data company. And then from that point in time, formed my own company and just started doing a lot of different Agile transformations. So from there, I was able to work at some really large behemoths like Microsoft and Apple, companies, of that size. American Airlines was another one. And then some small and medium companies that also wanted to go through a lean agile transformation. Um, and that led me eventually to getting a phone call from Scaled Agile. And it was the two co-founders, Dean Leffingwell, Drew Gemolo, and then a couple of other people that had reached out to me. And I said, yeah, this sounds interesting. I had this great phone call with Dean, and and I remember it pretty clearly because I was running my own company, running ragged, really. And he said, "Look, I would never be one to tell you to give up on your own company." He said, "I've started like 8 of them." And so he said, "I would be the last person to give you the advice and say, don't do anything else." He said, "But I'm going to ask you one question. Are your weekends yours?" I said, "What?" He said, "Are your weekends yours?" He said, "When I was running my own company," he said, "my weekends were not mine. They were all spent billing, they were spent advertising, marketing, because, you're a one-man show." And I said, "Yeah, that's pretty much what I do on the weekends." He said, "If you come work for me, I'll give you your weekends back." And I said, "You know what? That's a pretty powerful incentive." So I did. I worked for Scaled Agile for 9 years. And uh, they went through a layoff, reorganization back in, I guess, the November-ish timeframe of 2024. And that's when myself and two of my other colleagues at Scaled Agile, Dima Dejani and Jim Fowler, we started our own company. So we have a partnership of which I'm an owner in. And as you said, um, we started this off in sort of the consulting and services market, but that's not where we're going to stay put. We've generated some of our own classes on artificial intelligence. Our strategy, though, was, I mean, you start a new company, the first thing you have to do is start getting revenue in. So our strategy was to leverage what our backgrounds are, but that's not where we're staying. We recognize the impact that artificial intelligence is having. um, I'm studying this pretty heavily as part of my doctorate, and we want to use that knowledge and create some innovative products and services for artificial intelligence. So, kind of a long-winded way, but that's where the background is. In terms of my work with Purdue, it's a fairly recent development, and I just, I mean, I could be completely content just sitting in my pool and watching TV and turning my brain off. Maybe, playing guitar or something like that. But um, no, the answer came back no. I'm really intrigued. I had looked at, as an undergrad, I had looked at artificial intelligence in the computer science program. I'd researched that, and back in the 80s, it was all about what the Japanese were doing with AI and their chipsets, and they had invented their own language prologue for artificial intelligence development. And so I was always intrigued with it. But the nature of generative AI is so appealing to the masses, which is not anything we've ever had before in AI. The fact that we have hardware and cloud-based operations that allow us to be able to do this. We've never had this in the past in terms of artificial intelligence.
and
So I
and
really
there's
just said to
also
myself, I want to continue learning.
it's also for the first time in history when people that don't have particular experience in technology, they can interact with machines and with computers in a very natural way, where before only engineers could actually
Correct.
master interaction with machines. I have a few questions around the AI, but I had the curiosity just before, because safe, and like I said, I think
Yeah.
a lot of our audience knows safe, and at least in France and in Europe is it's kind of the leading framework right now. Um, what's special about safe framework? What makes it so adopted by big companies,
Yeah.
compared to others? I mean, there are also other scaled agile frameworks on the market, but it seems safe. It's the one that caught attention more than others.
Yeah. Yeah. That there are tons and tons and tons of frameworks out there. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is even before we start talking about the details of frameworks itself, what you have to understand, if you take a step back and kind of take a look at the big picture, there's an agile umbrella. Okay. The only thing that agile means when people say agile, and I know it's gotten to the point where it's the term is almost ubiquitous, but I think what most people don't realize is agile is the manifesto, period. It's four values and 12 principles. That's it. That's all agile is. Any framework, any framework that complies with those four values and 12 principles is by definition agile. Um, so underneath the agile umbrella are all these different frameworks. Some of them at the team level, like Scrum, for instance. Others like Safe, Scrum at Scale, Less, the more popular scaling frameworks. Um, they are agile. They're underneath the agile umbrella, but they are scaling frameworks. So they're not content with just having them at the team. They want to expand that. And um, I think the popularity, to answer your question around Safe, as one of the more popular, actually the most popular scaled framework. The main competitor to Safe is roll your own, doing your own scaling thing. Um, so in terms of the popularity of Safe, I think it boils down to um, really several key things. One is um, there is a conception in the market that that Safe is very rigid. It's not really. They just have a lot of guidance in the different places. I can't tell you the number of companies when Agile was first starting out. I can't tell you the number of companies that I went to where they sat me down and said, "Yeah, I know you're coming into this consulting thing and you're parachuting in to help us out, and I get all that, but we got to tell you a dirty little secret. And our dirty little secret is we don't do Scrum by the book." And then I would burst out laughing and then say, "Nobody does Scrum by the book. The whole point of a framework is to make it is that it's malleable and adjustable." And they go, "Well, we take some liberties with some of the ceremonies and that." And it's like, it's not about the ceremonies. The ceremonies are brain dead simple. I mean, the doesn't take a rocket scientist to execute a retrospective. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to run a daily scrum or a stand up meeting. Um, that's not the point. The point is the principles and the values. That's the point. Those are the right ways to solve this. And I think with Safe, one of the areas that it's very popular is it spends an enormous amount of time up front on the values and the principles because that's the why. That's the why behind it. I think the other thing is the configurations of Safe is makes it popular. It's man, there's a lot of stuff in that Safe framework, and I don't think we can do all that stuff. And we would just go, oh. You don't have to do all that stuff. There's a very small portion of safe called essential safe, and that's just the first level of scaling. But if you want the other stuff, then that's available to you as well. So I think that the popularity around safe is also due to the fact that companies have gotten results. You can't go into, a bunch of the Fortune 500 companies, have them use this, and then not get any value out of it. And so I think part of the reason it's been popular is that people have gotten value from this.
Mm. Um,
Or
and
as,
yeah,
or
thank
as
you,
we
thank
like
you.
to say in Outcomes 360, we've gotten, which is the new company, we get outcomes, not just output. We're not interested in output. We're interested in outcomes, the value delivered.
Yeah, and I think in the new world, let's say in the new era with AI and everything, everything starts to be shifted and even more focused than before on outcomes, not just output. Um, yeah, thank you for that perspective. Because I'm working with some big clients, and each time I'm also getting that question from time to time: why
Sure.
safe is that popular, and why should we use it and not use anything else, or just create our own, and so on and so forth. Um,
Well, I think just on one last comment on that point, which I think is really important, is if you work with large companies, let's say, even medium sized, there should be some understanding when think about it this way. So when I went back to get my MBA, I moved a little bit to the dark side, and started heavily studying economics and finance. And I think that helped me as a consultant because I could go in and have these conversations with C-level, have these conversations with finance, but I also had the technical side as well. And so I could kind of marry these things up. And I think it's perfectly reasonable if you go into a large company, they're going to spend millions probably on a transformation effort, right? When you consider tooling, when you consider training, when you consider the efforts and work going into the transformation itself, you could easily spend millions on that. Whether that's euros or dollars is irrelevant, but millions. Um, it's perfectly reasonable for your executives to ask, "What do I get for that?" I mean, if they spend, and I'm going to use an American colloquialism here, so apologize for my European and Asian friends, but when you have the Super Bowl in the United States, which is a big American football event, the commercials are outrageous, and I'm sure it's the same thing for the World Cup, right? They charge enormous amount of money for those commercial spots. You can't go in if you're Anheuser-Busch or whatever the name of that company is now. You can't go in there and say, yeah, we're going to spend $20 million on a Super Bowl commercial and or World Cup commercial, and the board doesn't just go, oh, sounds good, here's your check, $20 million, go for it, hope it works out. They're going to ask, well, if we invest $20 million, what do we get from that? Oh, well, it's going to increase sales X amount. We'll make it back here. There's a little bit of tax incentives according. We should be able to answer that when we're spending $5 million, $10 million on an agile transformation as well. We should be able to answer the question. I'm gonna I'm gonna invest in this. What do I get for that?
mm,
If you take this from the executive point of view, and executives, managers, they're not stupid people. They're very smart people. That's how they got there. And it would be disingenuous to say otherwise. They are smart people. I've dealt with a number of them, and lots of people at that level are brilliant. It's perfectly acceptable for them to ask that question, and we should be able to answer it.
and that brings me a bit towards my next questions, because I have a lot of curiosities, and we exchanged briefly in the weeks before our episode, and I was asking you about leadership.
Hmm.
So we're talking about about managers and making decisions. And I push this a bit forward about how is leadership in this new age of AI? And you talked me about you told me about the struggles that leaders have today with strategy, with people, and so on. What's your intake on leadership today, given this major shift that AI has brought to the market and to the world? Um,
I'll, I'll give you two answers to that. The first answer is accurate, but incredibly short, which is leadership is still figuring it out. They don't know what they don't know yet. So we're in a world of what was the famous Donald Rumsfeld quote during the Gulf War, which was we have some unknown unknowns and we have some known unknowns. And I would say both apply to leadership right now. They're trying to figure things out and they don't know because it's new. Are they going to save money? I mean, what's the most expensive asset that a company has? It's the people, right? So um, companies, you can dispense with the fallacy. I know politicians all the time like to talk about companies creating jobs and how companies creating jobs. And from my studies of economics, I can tell you one thing for certain. Companies don't want to create jobs. I promise you, if a company can do the same or more work with the same or less amount of people, they will do that. I guarantee it. Their shareholders will demand it, and the fiduciary leadership of the company, they're obligated to look at that. And so I think that's where the rub is, where people are trying to figure it out. Okay, so what do I do? Can I get value with less people? Let's try it. Do I need, which expertise do I need? The more complicated and probably longer answer to this is it's the first thing that I think a company needs to do when they're deciding to invest in artificial intelligence is they need to have a strategy behind it. And that strategy has to align with the corporate strategy. Okay, so it's not that you're coming in and you're saying, all right, we want strategy agility, which is fine. SAFe talks about that. And that's the ability to pivot within the market and be able to adapt to changes. Well, for the last 3-4 years with Gen AI, we've been going through a lot of changes. And leadership in this area, in my opinion, because of those unknowns, has been floundering a bit. I can't tell you the number of companies that I go into. I ask, what's your AI strategy? Well, our AI strategy, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a lot of experiments. Okay. So congratulations, you're normal. That's what everybody's doing. What are your differentiators? What are you working on? What are your competitors working on? Well, we're not really sure about that, but better get sure because AI isn't stagnant, right? 6 months from now, all these models that we're looking at are going to be ancient. They're not even
yeah,
talking
definitely.
about them at all. The the pace of change here is just so ridiculously fast. I mean, forget Moore's law. I mean, we're talking about exponential doubling, tripling, maybe. So I think that's where the struggle is. You need a cohesive AI strategy. Okay, you're experimenting. Cool. That's tactical, and that's a good first step. But how does that advance the strategy and AI of your organization? Secondly, and more importantly than your AI strategy is your data strategy. And I get blank stares whenever I go in and I go, what's your data strategy look like? And I go, well, what do you mean? And I go, your data, you're collecting data from your customers, right? Yeah. What are you doing with that? Okay, that's tactical. I get that. Tell me what the strategy is of that data. How are you protecting it? Because that feeds directly into artificial intelligence. And then it starts to get even more complex in terms of the overall architecture and scaling of your AI implementation. So you can experiment with the different things, different models, different platforms, maybe AWS over here, Azure over there. Okay, cool. You can experiment with all those different things, but there needs to be a cohesive strategy. What are you trying to accomplish this? What outcome do you want? Not output, because right now all you're doing is generating output. And oh, by the way, your employees, regardless of what they're telling you, are already way ahead of where you're at. So your strategy is way far behind. What can people upload into the AI LLMs, right? Do you have policies on that? Do you nothing? What are you going to do with that information and that data? Do you protect it? How do you protect it? Are you going to train LLMs on it or not? If you are, probably need to notify your customers. Build versus buy. Are you going to create your own LLM because you're worried about, people stealing your data? Or are you going to buy an LLM and use that through APIs or whatever? If you buy an LLM from, like, say, ChatGPT or something, what are their licensings? What is the protection area? Maybe you want to go with something open source and you want to grab Grok. Okay, great. But now you're on the hook because it's open source to keep up with any patches or maintenance or changes that you might want to do. And the short answer is leaders are still figuring out. The longer answer is if they want to try and figure it out, they need a cohesive strategy on both their AI and especially their data side of things, minimally. And they're going to have to
Mhm.
look at how that scales within the company itself. Is it if you're buying it, you leave that responsibility elsewhere. If you're building it, you got to think about that. How are you going to power that? What is it going to look like? If you use a foreign company, do you have to worry about that? Right. So if you're using Manus, okay, that's Chinese. Great platform for building agents, but does it phone home to China? I don't know. I have no idea. But it's a great platform. So those are things you have to weigh within yourself. So there's a lot of decisions that have to be made here. And at some point in time, um, and I'm doing a webinar with Safe coming up all around AI leadership. And these are the exact questions that we're going to dive into. And maybe there needs to be some kind of cohesive framework there for scaling artificial intelligence as well.
So, related to that, so there are a lot of questions, a lot of changes. How has the traditional model of organizations actually keep up with this pace of change? Because it seems like they struggle.
Yeah, they do. And again, without a cohesive strategy, if you're just focusing on tactics, you're going to lose a lot. You're going to lose a lot in terms of direction. You're going to lose a lot in terms of progress, gain, right? Because you're going to probably go back a few steps as you're doing all of these experiments. Um, so yeah, I think it's just a huge struggle in terms of organizational change. This represents, look, being as old as I am, I've been through this before. I've seen this movie. Okay. I saw this movie when the personal computers came on the market. And then lots of people were scared of how that was going to change their jobs and people were going to get laid off. And some did. And the others, their jobs just changed because of this. Then I saw it again when the internet happened in the 90s. And then all of a sudden people started freaking out. Oh my God, this is the next, this is the second coming. This is the greatest thing ever. And for that time it was. And people didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how they threw a whole bunch of things out there. They didn't have great strategy. Venture capital freaked out, poured a whole bunch of money into stuff they didn't know. Um, and without that strategic resolve, they essentially choked, right? We all had the dot-com crash in the early 2000s. So, and then that was probably, I mean, at the time it sucked, but it was probably a good thing because it got rid of people that, you know, probably didn't need to be there, companies that didn't need to be there, companies that didn't know what they were producing. And from that mess, from that rubble emerged companies like Google, companies like Amazon, who said, aha, I figured it out. Um, this is this is going to make us a ton of money. You know, we're going to sell books. And then when we're done selling books, we're going to sell everything else, right? The Amazon model of that. Apple becomes an internet company, and these companies become essentially out of that mess. They become big tech, and so we have big tech like we have today. Organizationally, I think a lot of people had to adapt very quickly, and I think that's why Agile became so popular, because it did beget frameworks that allowed you to make those changes pretty quickly to respond to that. Um, Organizational agility is a real thing. Some people think that it means, oh, then we're basically getting blessed to do an org change every year. No, nobody likes org changes. And no, that's not what we're saying. That's not organizational agility. Organizational agility, not just safe, but lean in general, right? So if you know people who are Six Sigma people, value streams are really important because they focus on the outcome at the very end. There's an exchange of value. Typically, you get money, the customer gets a product or service. So, organizationally, I completely agree with Dr. Mick Kirsten in his book From Project to Product that we got too involved in creating projects organizationally, and it affected us organizationally, and we built organizations to support projects. And projects are antithetical to flow. They're stop, start, continue kinds of things. And what we want is just a continuous flow. We want to fund products, and our organization needs to support that. And if you think about it, it makes sense. A project has no value, it's simply a container, and there's stuff inside it. The stuff inside it might have value, but what we do know are things like this has value to customers. So why are we funding projects? Fund this. This has a value to a customer. This is tangible. I can do stuff with this. I can make phone calls. I can send text messages. It's valuable. So organizationally, I think the way we need to be set up, as a long-winded answer, is I think the way we have to be set up is organizationally, we need to support the outcomes that we're giving to a customer. SAFe talks a lot about customer centricity. And organizationally, what we've said, the story that we've talked about has always been, we have this sort of dual operating system. In the beginning, we were working out of someone's garage, or in this case, Dean Leffingwell's attic in his house in Colorado, right? So just a small group of people, and all the companies started that way. Apple was at his dad's garage. Hewlett Packard, same thing. I mean, and you start as a super customer centric organization concentrating on the needs of your customer. As you grow, you set up a hierarchy, and as you know, Dr. John Cotter talks about it, you need that hierarchy. But you have to deal with HR, you have to pay taxes, you have to obey the laws, you have to file reports. These are things that have to be done. They're not optional unless you like jail, which I don't. So I think these are non-optional things that have to be there. So the hierarchy is there, but sometimes we lose our focus on the customer centricity. And what happens to the organization? The organization loses its agility because it's focusing on a hierarchy, not the customer. So if I were to ask you today, what are some customer-centric organizations? You'd probably say, oh, Amazon, that's a customer-centric organization. Apple, they're pretty insane about the customers. And organizationally, another area where we're failing, since you asked this whole question about organization, is we're not organized around that flow of value. We are not organized around the ability to service our customers. I'll tell you real quickly. I had the pleasure of going. I won't mention any names, but I had the pleasure of going to this very large bank in South Africa, and this large bank had the number one banking app, in that banking space, and they were working with Safe, and they took me down into where their development thing was, and I was surprised. They called it the dungeon because it was kind of like, but anyways, that's where they all did their work, and I was really shocked because they had said they're a customer centric organization, and whenever someone says that to me, I'm kind of like, yeah, sure. But they took me down to where they did their work, and you couldn't throw a rock in that place without hitting. All over the walls were plastered customer personas, customer journey maps, um, customer empathy maps, outputs of customer focus groups everywhere. Whenever a developer or product owner or product manager or someone in leadership was asking why we were doing something, it was all over the walls. It was staring them right in the face. We're doing this for our customers. This is what our customers said they wanted. This is the problems our customers are having. This is what we're addressing. I think organizations that are not organized in that fashion are doing a disservice to themselves, their shareholders, and their customers.
And AI is actually obliging organization today to be more
It
customer
is.
centric, more than ever before. If before the people and organizations still had time to think about, still had time to do mistakes, now this time has been reduced a lot. I mean, shifts are the competitiveness is so high. Um, we were used, and well, you come from also from the consulting world,
Right.
like I am, so I cannot not wonder how is consulting changes, because until now a lot of organizations, and large organizations particularly, were relying on getting consulting, on
Yeah.
being advised. um, how is this AI paradigm changes consulting, and what do you think clients want from a transformation partner today? Um,
Yeah. I think, and obviously it's not fact based. It's more opinion, reasoning about some of the things that I've done. So people may have other opinions around this, but I think in terms of AI, personally, I find it beneficial to consulting work. I find that it helps me understand. Um, I can take a lot of different thoughts and ideas and blend them in and get some feedback around that. It's trivial, I think, at this point, where um, if people want to use certain metrics, leading indicators, things like that, I think it's trivial to have AI generate that for you. So I don't think I think for consulting, our areas will be changing a little bit, but here's where the human aspect comes in, the consulting aspect. I would say in the example that I gave about metrics or something like that, where the AI generates the metrics and we use that to leverage, um, the outcomes from the company. A lot of companies also kind of fall into the trap of, in this specific example, too many men. I think here's where the human part comes in. Let's talk about that need, because maybe there is a need, maybe there's not. Um, and why are you using this metric when maybe this one would do better? But hang on, what do you really want? What is it you're trying to gather here? And I think in those cases, there is a blend of use of AI and consulting, and I think it's also very much in line with our philosophy. We're not looking for long term kind of contract type things. We want to get in there. We want to teach you how to fish rather than give you the fish, so you're not relying upon us, and then move forward. And if we've done our job, superior outcomes, maybe better focus on your customers, uh, whatever the thing is.
But do you think it will be also a change in the business model of the consulting firms? Because
Oh, for sure.
um, as I know, there are a lot of consulting firms that until now they were charging man hours and man hours after man hours, because they were selling very specialized consultants in
Yeah.
so many parts and so many places of a company. How would that? How do you see that change in terms of business model of consulting companies?
Oh, it's and I go back to what I said before when I made the kind of tongue-in-cheek comment about Moore's law. The speed of this is ridiculous. I think that it is going to change the business model, and people are going to have to release faster, because if they don't, their competitors are going to use AI to do that for them. If you look at what people are doing now and you look at MVPs, it's never been easier to create a minimal viable product. It's never been easier to prototype using AI, 3D printers. Um, so I would challenge the consultants out there in the market. How are you going to use this new AI to enhance your business? How are you going to
Mm.
use this to become more customer centric, focusing on those customers so that they do want to come back and use your services? What are you going to do? And so, put it bluntly, and to put a cap on this, what's your strategy? What's your AI strategy?
So because you're coaching a lot, and I'm also a coach. I'm doing a lot of coaching, organizational coaching, and team coaching. Um, how did these shifts and AI actually um, changed your coaching style? How did it make it evolve?
Um, I spend, well, in the first part, kind of going back to the customer centric and the strategic part, I spend a lot less time um, learning upfront about my customers and more time confirming what I already know. So I'll go in having built up all of this stuff. Um, by stuff, I mean knowledge, research, whatever, SWOT analysis, competition analysis, financials. All of this is kind of a giant portfolio to me of my client. And so when I go into an account, now it's all about, okay, this is what I understand. You said this is your strategy. Is that still? And so I think I think the way AI has really affected my coaching is it's gotten me a lot of information, but it's not information overload. I've used AI a lot to distill some of that information. Like, okay, you're giving me all of this stuff. How does this all align? And okay, forget about this sector. I'm not going to concentrate on that at all. This is where I want to focus. And who are their competitors? Who are their largest customers? What are their revenues like, and what's the trend? Are things trending down and they're in trouble? So um, it's given me a ton of options, and I like optionality. And so, like I said, when I go into a customer now, it's more about validating my understanding of where they're at, which means I can get up quicker, which means I can start providing uh, services and solutions, or proposing services and solutions much faster as well. So I think it certainly helped with the speed, but I think also the quality as well, because
Mm.
there are certain ideas that you can test out, almost simulating within AI, that you can't. For example, let's suppose you're addressing the board, right? And let's say you don't have a lot of experience with this board because it's a new client. AI can mimic these board members and the types of questions they may ask in terms of your presentation that you should be ready for, and things that you may not be thinking of because you're concentrating on in this presentation and you're not seeing the big picture. So I find that invaluable.
Yeah, and from what I hear, it not only enlarges a bit maybe the playground and gives new perspectives, but reduces the noise around some area and allows you to focus more on what's really important.
100%.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for the insights and for taking the time to be on the show.
My pleasure.
And hope to have you again soon.
Yeah, and I hope this was valuable for everyone, and thank you for inviting me. And hopefully we'll get together in another class or maybe even a consulting opportunity.
Yeah, why not? Thank you so much.
All right, take care.